Okay. So we'll go ahead and get started because today I think I'm not going to use up the whole class period, but I have a few announcements because in my count, we are starting week 13 of the semester, which means there are only a couple more weeks of classes before final exams week. So one of the things I went in and added was that my final deadline for all late work. I am accepting all late work. Most of you that are here on the Zoom today don't need that warning, but for anybody watching on the recording afterwards, that is my final deadline is May 21st. It is the Friday of final exams week, and I have to have a deadline because my grades are due the 26th, basically Wednesday after final exams. And I need to give myself enough time to grade everything that's going to come in at the end. So there are no exceptions after this. The other thing I encourage you to do is to be checking up on your grades in these next few weeks and make sure that everything looks right and that there aren't any issues. If I screwed up something in your grade, you want to let me know because it's usually a very easy fix. We can go ahead and do that now. That way there aren't any problems later. I will be putting in, you will be able to see your final grade on Canvas before I send it to the registrar. So basically, once you submit your History Today essay, you'll be completely done with this class and you can see what your grade is on Canvas once that is graded. So if there are any issues, you want to let me know before I submit grades to the registrar. Um, and so those are the last few things we have left to do. The primary source analysis this weekend, and then the history today as essay at the end. I'll say more about that next week, but first thing we have to get through is this primary source analysis number 2 paper here. The For this, you have to read the it moved on me. The Passion of Perpetua and Felicity, which we will do some close analysis of today, right? Now, I want to be very clear, especially for people watching on the recording. You are only answering one of these prompt questions. I'm giving you a choice based on just what theme you like the best. And we will talk about how to answer both of those using the source today. And you must cite Chicago style. I'm making you cite Chicago style again. Again, it's just that practice of using it. That's all I really care about in this class because I'm giving you the actual citation is right here. So what you're practicing is learning how to insert a footnote in a Word or Google Doc or Pages document. For the most part, everybody got it right in the last one. So in that case, it's just practice. Do the same thing you did in the last paper. But there were still about a third of the class that didn't get that right, and we want to make sure and we get it right. I will take points off if the inserting of the footnotes is not done and formatting is not done correctly because I'm giving it to you, right? But the main thing then is the source this week. That's what we will be working on. So let's get right to it. I had told you that this is a primary source document of a martyr. This is the oldest martyr story written by a Christian woman, right? So most historians do see this document as authentic. There are some problems with it. Last, there are problems with every source. So I'm bringing up the source right now. The problem with it is that it was clearly added to. Someone added to the document afterwards, and so the rest of it we can historians do believe that it was written by Perpetua herself, but we have to do something with, how do we interpret, what do we do with the things that were added to it, right? So that is one of the things that we'll look at today. Those of you that have already read it, that have looked at it, you were able to catch the narrator at the beginning and at the end, right? What did you make of the narrator, the things that are added to the story? Wait, did anybody read it? No, no one? Not a single person. Okay. All right. Then this is perfect because then we can read it together and decide what we make of the narrator in this story. So, first of all, this is a Christian story written in Africa, the African part of the Roman Empire. Right, this is where this is taking place. It's taking place in the African part of the Roman Empire where Christianity is illegal. So this is at the beginning. And Gerardo, I see your note on it. It is confusing, and this is why I'm making sure that we read it together. So let me share my screen again, and I will read the first few sentences of the Passion of Perpetua. It is technically called the Passion of Perpetua and Felicity. And we'll also talk about what's going on with Felicity, but this is primarily the story of Perpetua, right? So where the document starts, this is the narrator adding this, right? So let me read the first few sentences. And as I'm reading it, see what you think. What is the narrator adding to the story? Is it something significant? Is it not significant? What kind of background information or what does the narrator want to set up? How is he setting up the story? I use the pronoun he. I think in my head I made the narrator male, but we don't know actually the gender of the narrator. So okay, I will start. If ancient examples of the faith, which attest to God's grace and work to instruct man, were collected in writing for this purpose, so that God is honored and man is comforted by their reading, as if through a revision of those acts, why shouldn't even new examples be collected and serve either objective? So let's take this one sentence at a time because this is what you do with closed reading of documents, right? What is the narrator saying in this first sentence? This 1.1. This is where I'm like, this was still written in ancient times, so it can still be confusing. But who wants to translate this first sentence? Oh, putting it in the chat. So it's basically talking about showing an example of a martyr. Yeah, it's setting up, this is the story of a martyr, but more of, in addition to that, it's saying, right, these are examples of faith. Right? There's a reason why the story still is still being retold, right? These are examples of faith, right? And they are supposed to serve God's grace and work, right? Um, and Keith Stevens suggesting, the narrator here is suggesting that even further examples need to be collected of this the action of martyrs, right? That ancient examples are necessary, but by asking this question, why shouldn't even new examples be collected to serve either objective? He's also, the narrator's also saying, hey, we need more of these. We need to collect more of these stories. So then the narrator says, indeed, because these examples also will one day be old and considered necessary for future generations, even if in their present time these new acts are regarded as having a lesser authority due to the usual respect given to the past. So what's the narrator saying there? I swear I'm not trying to trick you.
Hold on, I'm just lost a little bit.
Dope, dope. Okay, okay, let's take it a step back. So this,
Not lost, but it's just the wording's so annoying.
yes, because one, this was written in Latin. So first of all, this is a translation from the Latin, and and on top of that, whoever translated this wanted to keep some of the structure in which it was written. So it is not written necessarily with us and making us read it easier in mind. But yes, Gerardo, he's saying we need more examples, right? He's making the case. He's using the story of Perpetua and the fact that it has been preserved to say that we need to keep the story of the faithful even today, because sometime in the future these are going to be old stories, but they're still going to be examples of the grace of God, essentially, right? So he's making the case for, hey, read this story. You're going to read this document. Um, Stories like that of Perpetua need to be saved and preserved for us and for future generations, but we need to also preserve future stories. That's what he says in the number 2. Then in number 3, he says, but let those who believe that there is one power of one Holy Spirit for all the ages of time perceive this. So, hey, people, pay attention to this. Newer things ought to be considered as greater, as they are the closest to the end days, in accordance with the abundance of grace decreed in the end time. Okay, also very kind of religious language, but let me check your chat. The narrator is claiming as to why new stories are needed and relevant to the time. Yeah, he's saying more important than even these ancient stories are stories from today. We need to preserve the stories from today, right? They're even more important, right? When he says things ought to be considered as greater. Wow, silly highlighting here. Um, he's saying it needs to be that these stories from today are even more important than these ancient stories of the martyrs, right? Let me see if I can figure out how to highlight. Well, this is a terrible highlight version of it, but there we go. I won't finish reading off the narrator, but why is the narrator going on and on saying, hey, these ancient stories, they're cool, but we need to preserve our stories today? Why do you think the narrator is inserting this lecture in front of a document about a Christian martyr? Why would the narrator do that? They're doing it on purpose, right? They're going out of their way to, they have preserved this document by this martyr. Perpetua becomes a saint eventually. They already have it saved. What's the point of adding even more to it? So Gerardo in the chat is saying, I think the reason is because there are no new stories. How will it be relevant to many? Further, some of these stories will be lost. I think that is part of it. I think that is part of it. He's very interested in preserving stories that set examples for Christians about how to behave, especially in a world that was getting more and more complex every year, right? With new challenges to Christianity. These stories have a purpose within the Christian church, right? They remind people how to behave, right? So when I'm looking at it as a historian, right, and I'm looking at what the narrator is adding here, what I'm seeing here is that there is a larger purpose to preserving the stories and why they're adding this background or these words, these sentences in front of the document. To me, I see a very clear, even like not just religious but almost political purpose, right? To me, this idea of let's preserve more stories, the narrator is interested in, hey, you out there, you're supposed to behave this way, be willing to give up your life for the church, and you will also be rewarded in the same way that this particular martyr has been rewarded. No? Does anybody else see that? It helps establish authority. Thank you, Christian, as well. Yes, it also helps establish authority. Like, hey, this story is really important. Pay attention to it. It's old, but it's also relevant to your life today, right? Later on, the narrator also adds, right? And so we also, who both acknowledge and honor these prophecies and the recent visions equally pledged, and who consider the powers of the Holy Spirit as an aid to the church, right? So these stories help the church very clearly. to which also it has sent the name Spirit in order to distribute gifts among all, just as the Lord has distributed it to each one. So here is about the rewards for behaving in this way. Um, and that this is a kind of celebration of God, right? The stories of the martyrs are a celebration of God for religious people, right? So it does have a religious purpose, and then it also has other rhetorical purposes, right? The establishing of authority. And to me, I think I'm reading a political purpose there of like this needs to be preserved so that we get more people to convert and more people to behave in this way. You don't have to agree with my assessment of it though. But all right, let's move on to the actual source. The actual source doesn't start till 3.1. So everything that else that's in here would be important if you're answering prompt number 2. Right? Let me go back to the prompt. Prompt number 2. How can we explain the appeal of martyr stories like that of Perpetua? How is the story shaped not just by the events, but also by the commentary added by the narrator? How do these elements define martyrdom? So part of what you might want to say here is that establishing of authority, the importance of it from a both religious point of view, but also from a historical point of view about why these stories need to be preserved. Right? That all helps you answer the second prompt. But okay, let's get right to Perpetua now. So at 3.1, who would like to read just this first 3 lines?
I'll read it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we were still under observation, she said, and my father wanted to destroy my faith with his arguments. He kept trying to dislodge me from my beliefs because of his affection. Father, I said, do you see that vase?
So right from the start, we've something might have been missing here in her diary entry, but when we start her diary entry, she starts by talking about her father. And what is her father trying to do? Can we tell just from these first 2 lines? She's putting it as my father wanted to destroy my faith. Right? Destroy my faith. Oh, let me not lose the chat. Yes, the father is trying. Oh no. Oh yes. Sorry, Gerardo, I misread that. He's trying to not make her believe. He's trying to get her to not to renounce Christianity. Right. So when we start the story, she's already been arrested. She's been arrested for the crime of being a Christian, and she is in jail. Right. So then she says to her father, and I'll finish this one really quick. It just says, Father, I said, do you see that vase lying there? Some little picture or other for the sake of example? And he says, yes. All right, who wants to read maybe number 2 and number 3?
I'll read it. And I said to him, is it able to be called by any other name other than what it is? No, he said. I too cannot call myself by any other name other than what I am, a Christian. Then my father, disturbed by this word, hurled himself at me as if he would pluck my eyes out. But he only scared me and he left me in defeat along with the devil's arguments.
You all see, what did she just call her father?
The devil.
She basically calls her father the devil here, right? Because that's what he brings to her, right? She's claiming he is bringing to her the devil's argument, right? Why is she calling? Why else is she calling her father the devil? He does not believe in Christianity. I mean, so much. So he's so passionate about it that he like threw himself at her like he was gonna hurt her, right? And he will absolutely refuse. Yeah, he refuses. Who would like to read 4 and 5? No one?
I'll read it.
Okay, thank you.
Then for a few days, when I was separated from my father, I thanked the Lord because he was not there. During that time, we were baptized, and the Holy Spirit told me to seek nothing else from the water of baptism except the endurance of the flesh. After a few days, we were taken into prison, and I was very afraid since I had never experienced such a dark place.
Yeah, so she is baptized. And she what is her experience here of the baptism? She's experiencing the Holy Spirit, she says, right? And that what she is meant to take, what she interprets as the baptism water giving her, is this kind of ability to endure, right? To survive what she's going to go through. Right? That's that i- that's the religious element, right? I have to tell you, I was baptized. I was baptized as a baby. I don't remember the Holy Spirit or the feeling of the Holy Spirit. But for a lot of people, especially when the baptism happens at an older age, this is the kind of religious experience that they will describe, right? I'll read number 9. I'm skipping some of this because you should spend a little bit more time reading some of this. But I'm going to skip to some of the key points that I want us to discuss. So number 9, she says, "I suffered many days, occupied with such concerns, and I gained permission for my child to remain in prison with me." Sorry, oh, that was terrible. Remain in prison with me, and at once I regained my health and was freed from suffering and anxiety regarding my child. And the prison suddenly became a palace for me. And so I would prefer to be there than any other place. What have we learned about Perpetua now? She's used to it. The other thing that this section is telling us, I skipped number 8, but it would have also told us up here. She has a child. Right? And actually, we know from other stories we've been able to put together about her life is that this is a fairly, like, it's a baby. She has a baby, right? She manages to get permission for the baby to come be with her in prison, right? And that gives her strength to be able to have her kid with her, right? But she has a child that is not a Christian. The child is not a Christian. The child is not meant to be in prison, right? Um, but but it is there. It is there now. Right? So 4.1. Who wants to read 4.1 and 2? Stop moving.
I'll go.
Thank you, Christian. You can
Then my
start.
brother spoke to me. Lady sister, already you possess great worth, so much that you might request a vision, and it would be shown to you, whether there would be suffering or escape. And I, who knew that I would converse with God, whose great blessings I had experienced, made a promise confidently to him, saying, I will tell you tomorrow. And I asked, and this was what was shown to me.
Okay, so here what she's describing, and this is confusing, but she's talking to her brother. And if I remember correctly, the brother is dead. He comes to her. She says she is experiencing, while she's in jail, her brother coming to her and telling her that she's about to have a vision, right? And then she's saying, okay, well, I I'll wait for it, right? And then what's coming next, I'll read number 3. What she's describing from number 3 on down is her vision. She is having a vision, right? That she interprets as coming directly from God, right? Because that's what her brother told her. So this is the vision. I saw a bronze ladder of amazing length, reaching all the way up to heaven, and it was narrow. And so it was only possible to climb it one by one. And on the ladder's sides, every type of iron tool was attached. There were swords, lances, hooks, knives, and darts, so that anyone who would climb negligently or not looking up would be cut to pieces, and his flesh would stick to the iron. I'm going to keep reading. And there was a serpent of amazing size lying under this ladder, ready to ambush the climbers. And he frightened people from the climbing. Yet Saturus climbed first. At that time, when we had been led away, he had not been there. Afterwards, he had voluntarily surrendered himself on our account because he had instructed us. And he arrived at the top of the ladder, and he turned and said to me, Perpetua, I am waiting for you, but take care that the serpent does not bite you. And I said, In the name of Jesus Christ, he will not harm me. From below the ladder, as if fearing me, the serpent slowly stuck out its head, as if I was stamping on the first step. I stepped on its head and I climbed up, and I saw the vast space of a garden, and sitting in the middle, a white-haired old man dressed as a shepherd, a gray man milking sheep, and many thousands standing around dressed in white. And he lifted his head and looked at me and said, You are welcome, child. And he called me, and from the cheese that he was milking, gave me about a mouthful. And I took it and in and I took it in clasped hands and I chewed it. And everyone standing around said, Amen. And at the sound of their voice, I awakened, and I was still chewing something sweet. And at once I related my vision to my brother, and we understood that there would be suffering ahead of us, and we no longer had any hope in this world. All right. What the hay was happening in her vision? Heaven. What, how do we know that there's a version of heaven in her vision? What are the telltale signs of, this is a representation of heaven? The long bronze ladder, but then at the top, right, she describes what is a garden type, and a white-haired man. Those are very typical ways, tropes of describing what heaven looks like, right? And she describes the white-haired man sitting there milking sheep. And she also describes many thousands of people standing up in the garden dressed in white. Mm-hmm. Yes, and I see. So that those are all, not every vision of heaven gets described in that way, but those are very typical elements that would describe heaven. And then there's this ladder, this long, thin ladder that takes you up to heaven, right? And at the bottom of the ladder, there's a snake, right? What do you think the snake and the ladder signify? The serpent might be the devil. Yeah, the devil who's trying to keep her from climbing up the stairs and reaching heaven. Yeah. What about the stairs? Remember, she describes the stairs as narrow. It's not a wide stairs. It's a ladder, ladder to climb up. And along every bit around the stairs, you have knives and weapons that are all the way up the stairs. If you are not careful as you walk up the stairs, you're going to stab yourself, you're going to cut yourself, you're going to hurt yourself. So it could be a kind of stairway to heaven. Not everyone goes up. There's a particular way you have to climb up. Yeah, if you manage to get away from the serpent at the bottom, right? There are still dangers at every step of the way climbing up. Yes. So one interpretation, Genesis, is that you have to be worthy. You have to take the right path up to heaven. Yes. And what does she get when she reaches the white man who's milking the sheep up in in heaven. Ooh, before Jasmine has a really good point in the chat. It weeds out non-believers and it's dangerous traps. Yes, there are dangerous traps all along the path to get to heaven. Right? Yeah. But is heaven worth it? How does she know that? Oh, let me ask you this. How does Perpetua know that she is doing the right thing and that she will go to heaven? Any thoughts? Because this vision she interprets as she's on the right path. She has faith. It was her faith. Yes. Let me show you on the document, right? When she in the vision, when she climbs up the stairs and she sees the man with the white hair, the white man, the hair, the man with the white hair tells her, "You are welcome, child." Right? And he gives her a piece of the cheese. Right? And so vivid is that dream that when she wakes up, she can still feel something inside of her mouth that is sweet. Right? She didn't physically eat anything, right? This was all in a vision, but she can feel it when she wakes up. The other thing she tells us here is that she understands that there would be suffering ahead of us. Right? How does she get that out of her vision? What part of the vision tells her that she will have a suffering path? Yeah, Jasmine, this vision that her brother's warning her about, or that her brother's telling her about, or the brother's involved in, is telling her, she interprets it as it's telling her what her future's about to be, right? That she's gonna have to climb up this ladder full of traps and full of dangers, but that if she does it, she's gonna get her reward of heaven, right? So if you had this vision, if this vision came to you, what would you do with it? Would you be cool? Keep on doing what I'm doing? I would be amazed. I would be a little freaked out, first of all. Why am I having visions? This is not normal for me. But she interprets it as a positive sign, right? She's going to interpret it as a positive sign. Yes, Jasmine, if the reward is heaven, it means she will die. The vision is telling her that there is a rough path of suffering ahead and that she will die. Right? That is definitely what the vision is telling her. So, I'll read a few more of this part. So, after a few days, a rumor spread quickly that we would be granted a hearing. My father arrived abruptly. So, dad's back, right? Consumed by worry. And he came up in order to dislodge me from my beliefs. So, he's coming to convince her to renounce Christianity. And this is how he makes his case. He says, "Daughter, have mercy on my white hairs. Have mercy on your father. If I am worthy to be called father by you, if with these hands I have brought you to the prime of your age, if I have put you first above all your brothers, don't dishonor me publicly. Consider your brothers. Consider your mother. Think of your maternal aunt. Think of your son, who will not be able to live without you. Bury your pride. Do not destroy us all, for none of us will speak freely if you suffer punishment." He was saying these things because of a father's piety. kissing my hands and throwing himself before my feet, crying. He no longer called me his daughter, but called me lady. And I was sad for my father's downfall because he was the only one from my whole family who would be unhappy at my suffering. And I consoled him by saying these words: what happens on that criminal scaffold will be what God wills. For know that we will not be under our own control, but in God's hands. And overcome with grief, he departed from me. So tell me, Jasmine, it sounds like a horrible vision. I see that in the chat. It is a horrible vision. Is her dad a terrible person? Yes or no? There we go. Now I see the answers in the chat. Not really. He's coming to her, begging her. Even she understands that her father loves her and he cares about her, right? And but he's also caring for her family's reputation and their future. For her to be convicted of being a criminal and to be sentenced to death, it's a huge shame on the family, right? It's a huge shame on the family. They will be suspect now. Not only that, right? So that says on here, it is a dishonor publicly to the family. But the other thing he brings up is think of your son. What is your son gonna do growing up without you, right? Um, these are actually powerful arguments that the dad makes to her about why she needs to renounce her faith, right? Comply with the authorities. Don't let them do this to you. Why does she not listen to her dad if he's being quite reasonable in his demands? Because it's God's will. Yeah. Why is this story then appealing to Christians? She wants the reward of heaven, God over everything. Yeah. So if you're going to write about prompt number 2, one of the key themes in this story is God over everything. God goes above your parents, above your children, above your family, right? Everything has to be placed below God. Right? And so this is one of the reasons why the narrator at the beginning is also going out of his way to tell us this is an important story. Yes, first God, and then family, right? But at the very, very top is God. Now let's talk about a little bit about the gender roles happening here, right? We talked about what the gender roles are in Rome, right? It's a patriarchal society in Rome, right? And even Christianity does end up supporting patriarchal structures, right? In both Christianity and in Roman society, the father has authority over a daughter. Okay, you're supposed to listen to your parents, right? Especially your father. And legally, the father has control over her. He has legal authority over his daughter. So is what she's doing, continuing to say no to her father, is that appropriate? Is that how a daughter is supposed to behave? She is not, exactly, Jasmine. She is not honoring her father. That is not how a daughter is supposed to behave. Not in Roman society, and not even within a Christian framework. That is not how a daughter behaves with her father. But here, not only is she allowed to behave this way, in fact, she is being praised, generations later by the Christian church. She's being praised and put up as an example of how to behave. Why? Your husband. She needs to honor her father and mother. But because God is above everything else, yeah, Jennifer, because God is above everything else, then she can defy her father, say no to him, right? And basically tell him to go away. Because within Christianity, because she's putting God above everything else, then in that context, she can dishonor her father. Right? This is really powerful. And to me, one of the things that, whether you're religious or not, one of the things that this explains is why so many women are attracted to the church, right? Within the framework of the church of Christianity, right? And this is the same for other religions. If you do the right things, you get to heaven, right? As long as you do the right things, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, as long as you do the right things, you're going to go to heaven, right? So in this instance, by being a faithful follower, Christian follower, she, as long as she's doing that, right? As long as God is first in the Christian church, then she can defy her father's authority. That does not jeopardize her path to heaven, right? Because she's through the visions receiving a message from God that she's doing the right thing. But as long as she's doing that, the idea is like, you can defy your father, you can defy the Roman emperor, as long as you're acting in the name of God, doing what God wants you to do. Gender roles out the window. What do you make of that? It's a bit of an not fully intended consequence of like the structure of the Christian church, right? And of believing in the ideology, that it does create, it's not possible for everyone, right? This kind of path of being a martyr, not everybody can have it, especially later on, where having visions or claiming that God is speaking to you will not be something good even within the church. But the church allows this one pathway in which women have some power. As long as they're meeting all the other requirements of the church, women have power. And that is one reason why there are, even still now today, a lot of women that support Christianity. I think that helps explain some of it. All right, I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to skip ahead a lot. I'm skipping not because some of this is not important. I think some of you can use some of what I'm skipping, because she's going to talk about her experience being in a prison in the Roman Empire, what she gets fed, having a conversation with one of the guards. She actually does, her story convinces one of the guards to become a Christian. And she has these interactions. But I'm skipping ahead to 10.1, because at 10.1 she has another vision. And this is another one of those just really interesting visions, especially when it comes to gender ideals, and even we're talking about what the typical stories of the martyrs are, right? One of the reasons why her story gets preserved for so long is because it's a very typical martyr experience. It basically is a cliche of martyr stories, right? But at 10, she starts to have another vision. Who'd like to read like the first three? 10.1, 0.2, and 0.3. Anyone? Any volunteers?
I'll
Even
read
if
it.
before. Oh, Jasmine, go ahead.
On the day before we were to fight, I saw in a vision the deacon Pompeius had come to the prison's entrance and was beating on it loudly. I went out and I opened the door for him. He was dressed in an unbelted white tunic, and his shoes had elaborate stripes. And he said to me, "Perpetua, we are waiting for you. Come." He held my hand and we began to go through terrain that was rough and winding. He
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay. He had just arrived, all out of breath. at the amphitheater when he led me into the middle of the arena, and he said to me, "Don't be afraid, for I am here with you and I suffer with you." And then he left.
All right, so this is all, she's already in a vision, right? And so the deacon is coming in, holding her hand, right, and telling you, "I am here with you. I will suffer with you." I'll read the next couple of ones. At 5, she says, "I caught sight of the huge stunned crowd. Since I knew that I had been condemned to the beast, I was amazed because the beasts were not being unleashed upon me. A certain Egyptian who was horrible in appearance and determined to fight with me came out along with his assistants." So she's being, I'm stopping to comment here. She's being brought up to the arena. There's a crowd in the arena. She's imagining, like the gladiator type of arenas, right? There's already spectators. And she imagines this, or in her vision, this Egyptian comes in. He is ugly, right? Horrible in appearance. And he wants to fight her. On top of that, he's not alone. He's got his assistants. All right. Handsome young men came to me as well. They were my supporters and assistants. So this is one of the ways you can tell who is good and who is bad in a lot of these stories. Good people are handsome. Bad people are ugly. Right. But then the vision continues and she says, I was undressed and I became a man. And my supporters began to rub me with oil, just as they usually do in an athletic contest. In turn, I saw that the Egyptian was rolling in the sand. When a man came out of such great size that he even rose above the highest point of the amphitheater. So he's in the arena. This ugly Egyptian comes out with his assistants. Then another man comes out who's a giant, taller than the amphitheater. But what happened in between there? I was undressed, right? She's getting ready to have some sort of confrontation with the Egyptian and with the giant. She gets undressed and she becomes a man. Yeah. Why? Any idea yet before we read the rest of it? Why is in her vision of fighting in the arena, why in the hay would she become a man? Gerardo, maybe being a man is representation of toughening up. Absolutely. Absolutely. To be strong enough to win, Jasmine and Carlos, it's the metaphor of power. Absolutely. I think all of those are true here. So let's keep reading to see what else happens in her vision. So the giant, he's really tall. He was dressed in an unbelted tunic, a purple one with 2 stripes extending down the middle of his chest, and intricate sandals decorated with gold and silver. So he's finely dressed. He was carrying a rod as if he were a gladiatorial trainer and a green branch on which there were golden apples. So he's dressed lavishly with a lot of accessories. And he called for silence and said, if the Egyptian is victorious over her, he will kill her with a sword. If she is victorious over him, she will receive this branch. So the branch with the golden apples. Then he left. We approached one another and we began to throw punches. So now here she is as a man fighting with the Egyptian. Okay. He wanted to grab my feet, but I began kicking him in the face with my heels. And I was raised up into the air and I began to kick him as if I was not treading on the ground. But when I saw him hesitate, I joined hands so that I interlocked my fingers and seized hold of his head. Then he fell on his face and I trampled on his head. and the crowd began to shout, and my supporters began to sing psalms. And I approached the gladiatorial trainer, and I received the branch. He kissed me, and he spoke to me, "Daughter, peace be with you." And I began to go with glory to the gate of life. And I awakened. Then I realized that I was not going to fight against wild beasts, but the devil. And I knew that the victory was mine. This is what I did all the way up to the day before the games. If anybody wishes to write about the final act of the games, however, let him write about it. But this is the vision she has, the last vision she has up right before she's going to be thrown into the arena, right? And what is her vision telling her? No one? How does she interpret it? She has a very positive interpretation of this vision, right? Yeah, win the arena to get to the gate of life. Yes. But if so basically she will win. She will win the fight. But will she actually beat anyone in the arena? No, she won't actually. This is just a metaphor for she will gain entrance into heaven, right? She will win the ultimate victory of going to heaven. But in order to go to heaven, you have to die, right? You do have to die. So that is what ends up happening at the arena, right? She will die in the arena. We know this because she is a martyr, right? She does end up being a martyr. So we do know she will die, right? But again, I think I'm wondering what else so anybody that wants to talk about this, if you're answering the gender prompt and you have a little bit more to say about what is happening in this "I became a man," right? Um, like, why does she, I mean, it is a symbol of power, right? Why does she, but I've always thought about this and thought, but why does she need to become physically a man in order to do this, in order to fight? Why, if this is a vision, right, a message from God, why couldn't she remain in her feminine body in order to fight this battle? Like, is this saying that only men are strong enough for this? Like, why? It implies women can't fight. Yeah, this is a weird, to me, this has always been a very weird element. Um, there is a graphic novel, by the way, there's a graphic novel um, of this story. It's called Perpetua's Journey. And in it, like, it depicts that moment in her vision where she turns into a man. And they depict her as like turning into a very like masculine man. For those of you that can see in here, she's got muscles and all of that. And it's actually seeing the visual of her transforming into a man. To me, it's even more jarring because I'm like, this actually does not even fit within like Christian visions of masculine and female in a lot of ways. Like, can a woman turn into a man? Is that what this is saying? Maybe. Only men are martyrs or sacrificed more than women. And a lot of the early martyrs would be men, but there's nothing in the Christian teaching that says that a woman can't be a martyr, right? So this is like maybe what part of this this is the one chance or one of the few ways in which women have of accessing that kind of masculine power within the church, right? In being a martyr, a woman is equal or above status as the men, right? According to the Christian church, at least, her status is above that of her father, for example, above that of the emperor and all these Roman men. She is, and for that she's going to get to heaven, right? So it's to me, it's a interesting, odd little scene here because I mean, she becomes a saint, so this is part of church canon. Yeah. Oh, Jasmine, that's a really interesting thing. If women in this time think they can fight for themselves in their own bodies, then maybe they can fight against the patriarchy, not and maybe not even just the patriarchy of the empire, but the patriarchy of the church. Because remember, at this point, when Perpetua is arrested and when she's sentenced to death and dies in the arena, this is the early church, right? This is very early in the church. So this is before Constantine converts to Christianity and makes Christianity the preferred religion of the Roman Empire, right? So this is early before they're setting the canon, before there are popes and archbishops and all of that, right? So at this point, when her story takes place, there's still a lot of fluidity in the church, right? When things are maybe more possible than later on, right? But they still make her story like they make her a saint. They make her a saint. Now there is another element here that I want to point you towards, and that is at number 15. So I'm going to scroll down to 15.1 because the title of the original source is The Passio of Perpetua and Felicity. But poor Felicity does not play a major role in this. This is Perpetua's diary. So we only hear about Felicity through the eyes of Perpetua, right? But there is another female martyr in this story, right? This is Felicity. Would anybody like to read like the first two, number one and number two, here in which we get to see Felicity?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, regarding Felicity, God's grace touched her in this way. When she was in her 8th month, for she was pregnant when she was arrested, she was in great sorrow as the date of the games was becoming imminent. Since she feared her death will be postponed because of her pregnancy, since it is not permitted for a pregnant woman to be presented for execution, and that she might spill her holy and innocent blood later on among the other actual criminals.
Oh, yes. So, okay, this we begin delving into the story of Felicity. So, Felicity is pregnant when she is arrested. Um, she's 8 months pregnant at the time this story is taking place. But I don't think I went into this last week. But the Romans, well, the fetus does not have any legal rights or moral rights under Roman law. They would still not, one of the places in which a fetus did have rights is that they would not execute pregnant women. So if you were pregnant, you got a delay in your execution. So they would still execute you, but they would wait until you gave birth, until after you gave birth. Once you gave birth, then afterwards you would be executed. So because she is pregnant, she is not going to be executed. But here, the diary is telling us that Felicity is really worried that her death will be postponed. She wants to die. She wants to die with all the other Christians that have been arrested in the group, right? If she's still pregnant at the date that they are going to be sent into the arena, she will not be sent with them. Instead, she will be sent later with other criminals, right? Because one of the ways in which people sentenced to death and are executed is by being put into the arena, right? So she doesn't want to die with the criminals. She wants to die with her fellow Christians. So let me go on. I'll read the next two. But her fellow martyrs were grievously saddened that they might leave behind so good a companion as a lonely comrade on the path of the same hope, salvation. And so they poured out abundant prayer to God with a continuous cry in unison 2 days before the games. So 2 days before the games, they begin praying and crying furiously. Immediately after their prayer, her labor began. And when, because of the natural difficulties of being in labor during the 8th month, she suffered while giving birth, one of the assistant prison wardens said to her, "How much do you suffer in this moment? What will you do when you are thrown before the beasts, which you were not afraid of, when you were unwilling to make the sacrifice?" And she answered, "At this moment, I suffer what I suffer. In that place, however, there will be another in me who suffers on behalf of me, since now I am going to suffer on his behalf." So she delivered a baby girl whom a sister raised for her as her own daughter. So is Felicity afraid of dying? Is she afraid? No. No. Why isn't she afraid of dying? Because the guard tells her, right? And this is part of the story. The guard tells her, "You're suffering a ton just in giving birth. But in like a day, we're going to throw you to the animals in the arena and you're going to die. If you can't even handle giving birth, how are you going to handle all the suffering that's going to come the with the actual execution?" Because she wants salvation. Yeah. In fact, they're praying. They pray for her to give birth. Why do her fellow Christians pray for her to give birth? Giving birth means an earlier death, right? So she can be executed along the Christians. Yeah. If if she didn't give birth at the time she did, her death would be postponed. She wouldn't die with them. You'd think that delaying your death might be a good thing, but she's not interested in delaying her death, right? She actually wants the birth to happen so that she can die earlier and die with her fellow Christians. There's several things to say here, and I think one of those things is like this is how powerful beliefs are, right? Oh, so Jasmine, that might be one thing to end the suffering quicker. Like, why delay it? If she's gonna suffer, she's gonna suffer. So why delay it? Might as well die with all the other Christians. Yeah, right. And it also speaks to just the power of their beliefs, right? This is one of those elements that makes people pay attention to Christianity, right? Why the stories become so popular, right? That they are willing to give up everything for their God. Okay, one. Do I have time? No, I don't have time for one last thing. But if you look at 20.1, at the very end of the story, you get the narrator coming back. Right? You get the narrator coming back and talking about young women and the role of young women in Christianity, right? And giving you more of an interpretation. So if you're going to write a gender, you also want to explore that 20.1 to talk about the role of women. And if you're going to answer the second prompt, the one about the role of martyrs, you want to look at let's see, 21.9, 21.9, 10, and 11. That whole the last few sentences in the source, because that it's the end of the story, and then the translator also coming back. Right? So, for example, for that last question, this is a bit of a crazy story, right? It's got visions and it's got violence. It's got a lot of brutality. Why would this story appeal to anyone? Or who would it appeal to? Oh, interesting, Christian. That is a really interesting statement. You could write your paper about why it would appeal more to men than women. Do you all agree? Would this story appeal more to men than it would appeal to women? There's room for argument here. Gerardo, you think it would appeal to both? You can see that. Uh, for people who seek religion, absolutely, it would absolutely appeal. It appeals to Christians, right? If any of you are Christian, this would probably appeal to you, right? Why would it appeal to religious people even today? Yeah. This can this I went up before the class today. I went on YouTube to see what was on YouTube on the story of Perpetua. There's several, most of them are Christian videos, videos put together by Christian churches telling the story of Perpetua. Some of them are animated, some of them are just people reading the text. To me, it's a sign of people are, even religious people are still interested in the story of Perpetua. Why do you think people are still interested today? Could be a good story. Yeah. It is kind of a fascinating story just in terms of storytelling, right? And the elements of the story. Anything else? For religious people, it still speaks to that moment of like salvation, right? And because that's the big promise that Christianity is making of the faithful, right? Is the possibility of going to heaven, right? And it shows that difference, believers and non-believers. Yeah, all these other people, even if they're nice, even if they have good intentions, like Perpetua's father, they will not be going to heaven because they're not doing um, they're not following the steps necessary. And it's evidence of heaven based on her visions. Yeah. Although now I have to say, now the church really has tried in recent decades and recent generations to stop that. They don't just accept anybody claiming to have a vision from God to be actually, like, not all of those are acknowledged as real. In fact, the church is really careful. In order to become a saint in the Catholic Church, right? You have to perform miracles, like, and there has to be evidence, clear evidence of the miracles happening. So, and the church has made it over the years really hard to prove that, right? A lot of it is because there's a fine line between, someone having a vision or getting a message from God and then just being not okay mentally, right? Some people not being okay. And so the church has really had to balance a lot of the belief in the existence of miracles, the belief in the existence of visions that directly come from God, and also the need to control some of those visions and control like all of these ideas, right? Was the last one Mother Teresa? I don't know if she was the last. Every year they saint a few people, but it's usually people that have been in the process of the paperwork of attaining sainthood. Um, every year they saint people. Yeah. Um, lately they've been accepting a lot of new saints from places like Latin America and Africa. Um, that many people perform miracles or did in the past. These are usually people that performed their miracles like ages ago. Yeah, no, and they have very strict guidelines about how you can prove a miracle because they don't accept just anyone just giving evidence of a miracle happening. You have to have like medical proof that nothing can explain what happened other than a miracle. It's very strict nowadays. Because one of the elements, and I'll come back to talking about this once you're all done with your papers, but one of the problems from the church is that a lot of the elements of the Christian church looks and feels a lot like magic, right? Like, how do you explain people getting visions? It's a kind of magical element. Now, the church would never call it magic. The church would never call it magic. But then people start thinking, well, if it's a lot like magic, so what's wrong with the magic that like the neighborhood witch performs? If miracles and visions can happen, why can't it's a different kind of magic. So the church early on, right, the medieval church in the Middle Ages, the church has to be very clear, has to try to draw lines about what counts as religion and what does not. Because for people who remember, most people in the Middle Ages early on are not reading the Bible. They can't. Most people are illiterate, and it's in languages that they can't read. They have to try to explain to people who are not reading the Bible what's the difference, because there's a lot of overlap in church practice and in a lot of Christians practicing magic that is not accepted by the church as magic. We'll get back to that. So we have a bit more to say and a bit more to do in terms of the paper. So I'm going to ask you to come back on Wednesday so we can talk about, okay, what makes a good thesis, how we can form a good thesis around this story, and how we can write, how you can all write a good paper on this. So you can start writing now, start brainstorming. I will not take up the whole class period on Wednesday like I did today. I didn't mean to, but I always get carried away. But finish reading the story on your own and decide which prompt you're going to write. Right? On Wednesday, I will ask you, what prompt are you going to write about? And then we'll talk about the mechanics of writing the paper. Does that sound good? Yes. Okay. If you start writing now, you can, and you come in on Wednesday with a draft, I will read the draft.